Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are talking about some pretty big news for the Boston Celtics. Just about maybe an hour or two ago, the Celtics announced that they are, or it was announced that the Celtics are reportedly offering Jaylen Brown a supermax contract extension. It's worth an additional 5 years and up to $304 million, which would make it the biggest or the richest contract in NBA history if it is actually, signed and finalized here. So this was kind of the big talk for the Celtics in the offseason, at least prior to the Porzingis trade. Obviously, that kind of shook things up a little bit, but one of the biggest issues for the Celtics going into this offseason was what they were planning to do in the future. Jaylen Brown was eligible for an extension now. Jason Tatum will be eligible in the near future, I think starting either this year or next. But there was a lot of talk about whether the Celtics would be willing to commit the massive amounts of money over the long term that it would take to keep Tatum and Brown in Celtics jerseys. And at least on the Jaylen Brown front, we now have our answer. That answer is yes, they are not afraid of the price tag, and they came out and paid a pretty hefty sum here. As we will take a look at exactly what this extension sort of entails for Jaylen Brown. Right off the top of the bat, though, we should say for this season, nothing will change. This is an extension. It is set to kick in next season, so Jaylen Brown will still play out the final year of his previous deal. This is not sort of one of those scenarios where the extension sort of eats some of the future years on his contract because he was in the last year. So, with that in mind, this season 22-23, the salary does not change. But starting in the 2024-2025 season, he is going to make a hell of a lot of money. Starting at 52.4 million in the 24-25 season, 25-26 that bumps up to 56.6 million. 2026, 2027, we crack the 60 million mark at 60.7 million. 27, 28, it's up to 64.9 million. And by the final year of the extension in the 28-29 season, he is going to make $69.1 million. That is just an insane amount of money, first of all, but it's something that the Celtics apparently are willing to commit for. But with that in mind, we ask the question of why, right? Why are they willing to commit $300 million to Jaylen Brown? And the reasoning why is because Jaylen Brown has been pretty damn good for them over the course of his career. He has played all 7 of his seasons in Boston, and the most recent one, the 2022-2023 campaign, featured almost all career highs for Jaylen Brown. He had a career high in scoring, in rebounding, and in field goal percentage, and he was tied for his career high in terms of his assist numbers. So when you got a guy going into, year 7 with your team, and he is continuing, I would say, to improve, to put up numbers, to still sort of produce on a team that more and more starts feeling like it's a little bit more leaning towards Tatum than Brown, but Jaylen Brown is still out here putting up some exceptional numbers. In fact, taking a look at his stats for that season as a whole, I was just sort of mentioning where he had gotten career highs, but in terms of the actual numbers, 26.6 points per game, 6.9 rebounds per game, 3.5 assists, 1.1 steals, while shooting 49.1% from the field overall and 33.5% from three-point range. So maybe there's one knock on him, right? For the regular season, at least. His three-point percentage is good, but not great. But 26.6 points per game. He's obviously doing pretty damn well, even if he's not an elite three-point shooter. Obviously, all of these numbers did dip a little bit in the playoffs, but it's very rare to find a guy whose numbers don't sort of decline at least a little bit in the playoffs. But if you're Brown, this is why they went out and paid you this money. It should also be noted 22-23 saw him make his second All-Star appearance as well, and he was named to, I want to say, second team All-NBA, which is part of the reason why he is eligible for this Supermax extension. So Brown's got the numbers, he's got the accolades, and honestly, that's part of the reason why we kind of already suspected or knew that this was coming, right? That this was going to be a play that the Celtics would make. I mentioned at the start of this video that it was something that there was a lot of talk about. Prior to the Porzingis trade, it was kind of the biggest deal that the Celtics were going to need to deal with going into the offseason. And that generated a lot of talk, but it really did seem like just talk, right? There were some people who, after the Celtics sort of get bounced by the Heat, there were people saying that, maybe Brown's not worth the extension, or people trying to manifest trade scenarios where the Celtics would just blow it up and trade someone like Jaylen Brown away and try to rebuild around Tatum alone. But personally, it always felt like those scenarios, these sorts of talks were really coming out of nowhere. Right? They didn't really seem to have any evidence to support them. We had heard nothing from Brown about wanting to leave. We had heard nothing from the Celtics about even being open to offers to move him, right? And there was clearly no indication that they weren't going to extend him and just sort of let him walk after this current season. That was just nowhere. So I think a lot of it was talk. I think a lot of it was media centered around other teams maybe trying to manifest will a trade into existence, so to speak. And it can certainly be said that a lot of that talk was bolstered by the fact that Jaylen Brown struggled a little bit towards the back end of the Celtics run, in particular that one game where he really, really suffered on the turnover front, just kind of lost the ball over and over again. Obviously that fueled a lot of sort of people clowning on him on, Twitter, Reddit, general internet stuff. But some people took that to the next level, started talking about whether or not the Celtics would even want to keep him long term, and that was frankly ridiculous talk. I don't know. That's taking an internet meme and sort of trying to drag it into the real world of the financial and analytical side of basketball, and you really can't do that, guys. The memes are fun, the jokes are fun, but you got to keep them separate from the actual basketball at a certain point. And at least the Celtics, their brass, their front office, were certainly able to do that. They weren't listening to a lot of the jokes and the noise. They knew Brown's value. They knew Brown's value. I don't know if it's $300 million. That's a hell of a lot of money, but he's eligible for a Supermax extension. You give him the Supermax extension, I suppose. But that does move us into an interesting territory now for the Celtics, because they are fully committed. And not just to Jaylen Brown at this point. They are committed going into the future as well, right? Because realistically speaking, it seems like there is no way that the Celtics give Jaylen Brown a $300 million contract extension if they're not also committed to keeping Jason Tatum. Maybe that's not true. Maybe they did the math and decided, hey, Brown is our guy, Tatum is expendable, or Tatum is maybe someone we could try to get for cheaper because he does have 2 seasons under contract and then his player option. So he's eligible for an extension right now, but maybe the Celtics try to wait and see if he becomes not super max eligible in a year or two based on accolades. I'm not really sure how that happens. I don't know if you can become eligible and then lose that eligibility. Sorry, I smacked the microphone. But I don't know. That's laying out a scenario that I don't even think the Celtics are thinking about, right? I think that they are simply going to go for Tatum and sign him long term as well when the time comes, and lock down their other star for the foreseeable future. But in doing that, they put a lot of money into 2 guys, right? If Tatum gets something even remotely similar to what we're seeing here for Jaylen Brown, then you are going to have 2 guys on your roster soaking up over $100 million of your team's cap space moving forward, which will make the Celtics a team that is going to, by necessity, have to look very different from what we see right now. They're going to have to be a little bit tighter with their finances and their contracts to put pieces around that star duo, or they're going to have to go the route of the Golden State Warriors and just commit to an unbelievably high tax bill and go over that luxury tax threshold, which with the sort of new version of the CBA, we're still not 100% sure just how drastic the consequences will be. Obviously, we have an idea based on the numbers and the wording of the CBA, but it hasn't been put into practice yet. So the Warriors had to pay a shit ton of money in terms of their luxury tax, but it got them multiple championships and, frankly, one of the greatest dynasties in the history of basketball. So if you're the Celtics, you know, maybe that's a trade-off that you're willing to make if it works out for you. But the money is going to become an issue. And with that in mind, we start taking a look at other pieces of this current Celtics roster, and we have to wonder where they fit into this, right? First and foremost, Kristaps Porzingis, right? How does he now fit into a team that is paying one guy at least $50 million a year and could potentially be paying two once Tatum gets his extension if he does, right? Because the money is going to be tight. The Celtics traded for Porzingis this offseason. Kristaps Porzingis is in the final year of his contract after he opted into that $36 million player option that was originally with the Wizards. So, I don't know. If Jaylen Brown's going to make $52.4 million next year, if Jason Tatum is going to be making $50 plus million a few years after that with his extension, then is there enough money for Porzingis to make Boston his home sort of long term here? Or are the Celtics looking at a 1 year rental maybe? Have him play out the last year of his contract, see where it goes. If you're the Celtics, I think the plan at least is to play out this last year no matter what. I do not know if they're going to be all too keen on talking about an extension with Porzingis during the season itself, if that makes any sense. Unless Porzingis is willing to really ask some tough questions about his pay and potentially cutting it. I think if you're Boston, you run it with what you've got right now. You see how Porzingis fits in, and if you do compete to the level that you're happy with, then you talk about re-signing him in the offseason instead of potentially talking an extension. Because if there are extension talks right now, it almost certainly is going to be centered around Tatum instead. So for Porzingis, yeah, that kind of sucks a little bit, right? But you're making the same $36 million that you would have made if you had opted into your contract back in Washington, and you get to play for the Boston Celtics, who are going to try to compete for a title instead of the Washington Wizards, who are almost certainly going for a rebuild. Let's put it that way. That's probably the most polite way that I can phrase that. So, yeah. And also, was Porzingis going to get more than $36 million a year on the open market if he had opted out of his player option and tested free agency? I don't really know. And if he did get that kind of money, it may not have been from a team like Boston, who, again, is trying to compete for a championship. So if you're Porzingis, you have absolute questions about your long-term future, but play a season in Boston, see how far you can go, collect your $36 million, pass go, etc., and then see where you are from there in the next offseason. But, well, if we're looking at what the Celtics might look like in the future here, with or without Porzingis, we already kind of have a model of what that could look like, right? And that model is the Phoenix Suns. They basically did, or are doing right now, what we think the Celtics might have to do if they sign both Tatum and Brown long term, right? The Suns have already shown us what it looks like when a team has top-heavy contracts. They've got Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton soaking up the vast majority of their cap space. So the rest of the lineup is a stable of cheap guys off the bench, right? Role players, guys that were not going to soak up a whole lot of money, and I think a couple of them are really just being paid the vet minimum for their service time. So they've still got a roster that looks pretty good. They did not go out and just pick up 10 G leaguers or something like that. They've got guys, names that you probably recognize from the benches of other teams in previous seasons. So it's a model that at least puts together what looks like a viable roster. Obviously, we're still in the off season. We haven't seen the Suns play, so we don't know if it actually works or not. But on paper, they have a lineup that's going to work. And the Celtics may have to do something similar if they're going to pay both Brown and Tatum upwards of $50-60 million in the near future. And if they're keeping Porzingis as well, if they're going to sign Kristaps Porzingis long term, then there is absolutely no way that they avoid this scenario, right? They will be the Phoenix Suns of the East in terms of their roster construction. If Brown and Tatum are making over $100 million and then you add Porzingis into the mix, somewhere between maybe 30 and 40 million, that leaves you with 30-ish million before the luxury tax to fill out every other position other than those three. So, who does that affect the most? Well, the guys who right now are sort of on mid-ish level contracts, mid to medium high. Guys like Malcolm Brogdon, he's making $22 million a year. Guys like Derek White, who's being paid $18 million a year. They could not be retained at those prices if the Celtics did have to go in that direction. If they end up committing to a big three of Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis at the rates that we think that they're going to be worth, you will not be able to pay a guy like Malcolm Brogdon $22 million. I mean, you could, right? But you wouldn't want to. I don't know. I'm not sure they want to pay Malcolm Brogdon $22 million right now, even if you're the Celtics. But that's a different point. The point for the Celtics will be they're going to need to look for cheap alternatives. You're not going to be able to keep guys on those contracts. You are going to have to massively cut down in terms of the actual financial value that you're offering some of these players. And that is possible. As I said, we just saw the Suns do it, right? And they got guys in their bench who obviously aren't star players, but what team does have star players coming off the bench, right? You are looking for solid role players who are going to know what their job is and do it. But you might have to sacrifice some guys along the way. Guys like Brogdon, guys like Derek White, guys like Al Horford and Robert Williams III, who are making, I think it's $10 and $11 million respectively. Those are the kind of guys that you either have to maybe talk down into cheaper contracts or you may have to let go. But honestly, all of those concerns, if you're the Celtics, they are significant, right? How much will we pay Tatum in the future? When should we talk about that extension? Do we keep Porzingis? If we do, how much will it cost? If we keep everybody, then who do we have to cut? Who can we no longer afford to have? How do we go out and find cheap guys to fill out our roster the way that the Suns did? All of this stuff, right? They are significant concerns. They should be something that you're at least slightly worried about if you're a Celtics fan. But they are concerns for the future, 100%. There will be a reckoning here for the Boston Celtics at some point, but it is not today. Today, the Celtics know that they have a championship window here with their two star players. With Tatum and Brown at the helm, this team has been on the cusp of winning that title over and over again, right? They've made it deep into the playoffs. They've made the conference finals. Hell, they made the finals against the Warriors one year and obviously weren't able to win, but they know that they're close. They know that the window is still open here, and they have not given up on making their sort of breakthrough and winning that sort of elusive championship title. Rather than just give up, break things up, trade Jaylen Brown for parts and try to build around Tatum or something like that by himself, they're leaning into their star duo, right? Tatum and Brown are the future for this team. Apparently, no matter the cost. So, Boston is willing to pay whatever it's going to take. The question now is whether the move pays off, right? Jaylen Brown is going to make $300 million over the next 5-6 seasons. Jason Tatum is almost certainly going to do the same. Can the Celtics put a team around that duo? And can that duo elevate their play and the play of the players around them high enough to finally get through and win that championship? That is something that, quite frankly, no one can answer. And if anyone tells you that they have a definitive answer, they are straight up lying to you, because this team has been trying for quite a few years now. And like I said, they've been close, but they haven't quite made it. So whatever that last little bit that they need is, they have still yet to figure it out. Maybe it's Porzingis. Maybe this year is the year, but we're going to have to wait and see. In the meantime, the Brinks truck has been packed up to Jaylen Brown's house. So congratulations to him. He's got the biggest contract in the league, which I don't know. If you'd have asked me, oh, who's the guy with the biggest contract in the league, I would not have figured that it was Jaylen Brown, and obviously up until today, it wasn't. I think previously the largest extension signed had been Nikola Jokic's, and that was 270 million. So this kind of blows that out of the water a little bit. But the new CBA kicks in, some new rules get thrown in place. The Supermax rules are always weird. If you want to try and go look through the actual wording of how it all works, be my guest. But it's a dry read for sure. Trust me, I have attempted to read through it. The language of the CBA is not exactly conducive to interesting reading, but someone in the Celtics organization sort of figured it out, and obviously it leads to a $300 million contract offer for Jaylen Brown. So good for him, good for the Celtics. Let's see if it pays off. But that is really sort of my reaction to this. I'm not even going to say thoughts, because I just kind of wrote all this out in the last hour or so once I heard the news. But let me know what you think. Is Jaylen Brown worth $300 million? Oh boy, I honestly would say probably not. I'm not sure any player in the league's worth 300 million. That's just an insane amount of money. But once we get past that, is Jaylen Brown worth the extension? Was this the right call for the Celtics? Will they be looking to extend Jason Tatum as well when his time comes? And I guess other than that, what do you think the future is for Porzingis? And do you think this Celtics roster is going to be good enough to finally get that championship for them? Or do they fall short? In which case, they've got a hell of a lot of questions to answer in terms of what their roster looks like and how much they're paying some of these guys. But it's a very interesting situation in Boston, and obviously I would like to hear as many perspectives as possible. So feel free to let me know your thoughts. Other than that, though, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.